Finance. I'm going to start talking about employee stock options. So places like Walmart, you can, I think, get employee stock options. It's another way the company can give employees compensation for work. Employees like to think of their options like cash. This woman who writes this book cautions against it because stock options are not like receiving cash. An option represents the right to buy stock, not a stock position. Your company, ESO or employee stock options, will give you the right to purchase company shares at a specific price. Options have a lot of lingo, terms, words. Your options have a grant date, G-R-A-N-T, grant date. That's the date you receive them, the grant date. They also have a strike price, S-T-R-I-K-E, strike price, or exercise price. That's the same thing, strike price and exercise price. That's the price at which you can purchase your company's shares. Your company's shares price may be above or below the strike price at any given time. So look and see, I guess, what your company's share is actually worth, because if your strike price is below that, that might be a good time to get an option. Let's see what she says. Your options also have a vesting period. Lastly, they have an expiration date, a date after which your options lapse and you can no longer purchase company shares at that designated strike price. So there's a grant date, that's the date the option's given to you. Then there's a vesting period, that's the date after which you can exercise your option and purchase the stock. And then there's an expiration date. So she's saying that if the stock is worth more, if the company stock is worth more than the strike price, what they're offering it to you for, I know that I hold up the book, it'll show it backwards, that's a good time to buy it because they're giving you a price lower. But if the company stock is worth less than what the strike price is, what they're offering you to buy it, don't buy it. Don't take the stock option at that time. And then there's this length of time. So there's the length of time in which you can exercise that strike price. So you have to watch what the company stock is actually worth. And if they say you can buy it for $1 and the company stock is worth $2, that's great. If the company stock is worth 50 cents, that's not great. So in that period when you can buy at the strike price that they've offered you, only buy it if the company stock is actually worth more than the strike price, more than the price they've offered it to you. And you have only so long to make that employee stock option purchase. There's an expiration date when their offer or their option is done. So she's saying exactly what I just said. One option gives you the right to buy 100 shares. If, for example, you negotiate a compensation package entitling you to 200 options, you then have the right to purchase 20,000 shares. 100 shares, entitling you to 200 options. Okay, 20,000 shares. For successful companies with rapid increase in share prices, employee options can produce sudden and unexpected millionaires, albeit millionaires with tax issues. Because if you buy something low and you sell it high, you get taxed on the whole amount you made. As there's a possibility of the option expiring worthless, having an option subjects you to more risk than simply owning an RSU. Now, I didn't read us what RSUs were. Restricted stock option is an RSU. A restricted stock option, or RSU, is employee compensation in the form of company shares. The RSUs are granted to employees but cannot be sold until after a certain time period, known as the vesting period. And after that vesting period has passed, you could sell them. When the vesting period is over, the market value of the vested shares is used to formally determine the taxable compensation. So depending on how much the stock increased or decreased is how much you'd be taxed if it increased. If it decreased, then I guess you lost money. So all of these are called ESOs. Well, that's employee stock option. These are all equity compensation. So that's an employer benefit program. That's what the RSU or the restricted stock option and the ESO or the employee stock option are both equity compensations. Equity is money you get in something. If I have equity in something, I own part of something. If you have equity in your car, for example, so they often say if you buy a brand new car and you drive it off the lot, it suddenly drops in value, so you actually owe more than it's worth. I've had friends who tried to trade in a car they bought with a loan and it's worth less than what they owe. This happens all the time. But especially with a brand new car and getting a loan at the dealership, it's the drop is drastic. I know there's a number for it, but I don't know what the number is. So there's also a type of insurance called gap insurance. So if you did drive a car off the lot and it crashed, which I've heard of happening right away, you owe the amount that you owe, and that car is actually worth less. So you still have to pay the whole amount. So your insurance would cover what the car is worth, but it wouldn't cover that gap between what it's worth and what you owe on it. So for example, if you bought a $35,000 car and it crashed and it was worth $20,000 and you still owed $30,000 on it, you'd have to cover the gap unless you bought gap insurance, which covers that gap between what you owe and what the car's value is. Because if you have insurance, you have to have insurance if you're going to get a car loan. That's one of the rules. Same with having a mortgage. You have to have homeowner's insurance if you're going to have a mortgage, because they know you can't pay for the house if it burns down. So you have to have insurance, because their value is in the value of how much the house is worth, and that's what they're banking on if you can't pay your mortgage every month. Okay, so we have equity compensation. Let's get back to that. Equity compensation, back to what your company might give you as opposed to paying you. So the employer benefit program known as employee stock option. If you do not have employee stock options, you might want to skip this section. But I think Walmart does. I don't know if Skechers has employee stock options. So we're going to just keep going on with, so you have restricted stock option, and that seems like they're saying it's safer. It's employee compensation in the form of company shares. They're granted to the employee but cannot be sold until after a certain period of time. So it's not like you're buying or selling it at a point. You don't get to decide that point. They're just giving you shares. So that's restricted stock options, units, excuse me. And okay, let's see. We have an example. Elsie works for ABC Company. In her contract, ABC grants her 100 shares of restricted stock units each year on her work anniversary, but they take another year to vest, so she has to wait a whole year before she can sell them. On the date when the RSU, or the restricted stock unit, vests, the shares are worth $100. Elsie receives $10,000. That's $100 times 100 shares. In ordinary taxable income, in addition to her salary at the ABC Company. In essence, she receives $10,000 worth of stock as though it were cash. Okay, so then she might owe $4,000 in taxes. But at that point, I suppose, after the vested period of a year, she sells them, or she can keep them, I would imagine, because she owns stock, so it could get worth more. I don't know if you have to sell them. So the employee stock option is something that's an option. Now, I'm wondering if you don't buy the employee stock, what happens? Like, did they say, here's your money, you can buy it or you can't? It's a lot of lingo. The options have the grant date and they have the strike price. Okay. So exercising your stock option only makes sense if the strike price is below the value of the stock. We already talked about that. Okay. So there's a possibility in the option of is expiring worthless. Having an option subjects you to more risk than simply owning an RSU. So I guess that the stock option, if you don't purchase because you always see it's under the price, then you just lose the money. There are two types of employee stock options: non-qualified stock options and incentive stock options. Number one feature that sets these two types apart is their taxation. The key characterization of a non-qualified stock option, or an NQSO. Non-qualified stock options, like any other options, give the employee the right to purchase company shares at the strike price over a set period of time, that vesting period. I am purposely being vague regarding the time frames of the companies NQSO. Employers may grant you any terms in any period of years. You must read your document and negotiate when it's possible. I think that's more for a person who's in a business position where they can negotiate, but maybe you guys can. When you exercise your options, you are subject to a W-2 compensation on the difference between the exercise price and the market price. So I wonder if that's if the stock was lower in price than what you bought it for. In addition to her RSU, Elsie also receives an NQSO with an exercise price of $10. On the day Elsie's option vests, shares of the company are worth $100. Since one option represents the right to buy 100 shares of stock, Elsie can exercise the option to purchase 100 shares of stocks at $10 per share. Thus, she will receive $9,000 in W-2 compensation. I don't quite understand that. So mathematically it says 100 market price at exercise minus 10 exercise price times 100 shares is $9,000 ordinary income. Oh, so the $9,000 W-2 compensation, I guess, is what she got that she has to put on the W-2, but it says compensation. Okay, this is where it goes. Okay. Elsie is responsible for income taxes on the $9,000. That makes more sense to me. She can immediately sell her 100 shares for $10,000, or she can choose to keep them. If she holds the shares, she will have the same tax treatment going forward as if she had purchased them in the market herself, without the options. Okay, so you can hold on to the shares after you buy them. Going forward, her cost basis is $100 per share. This is because she already paid taxes on the difference between 10 exercise price and 100 market price. So I would imagine, my guess would be, if you bought it over there with your employee stock option, and then you sell it at a higher price, you're just going to have to pay the tax on the entire increase. All right, I think that's enough of that. 12 minutes, 0.25, that's a quarter of an hour finance math.